me first. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming for this wonderful special event. I really want to thank Aldo Hernandez and Doug Bressler especially for kind of really running the show here at Howl. And it's been just wonderful to work with for the last few years, helping so many different projects come to fruition. But this is something we just knew we had to do something around Alan's birthday and showcase a handful of friends that really haven't had a chance yet to share stories. So one of the stories I really wanted to focus on was Alan's trip to India in 1961, 1962. It seems like he'd been there for decades, but it was really only 18 months. So Bob Holman here, who has done one film at least on following the footsteps of Alan in India, and Deb Baker, whose great book, The Beats in India, also starts off kind of following the path of Hope Savage, which was the mysterious, beautiful poet that was the inspiration for Alan to end up going to India. Well, it was Gregory Corso that really wanted to go because he was in love with Hope. Alan ended up going instead, and Gregory stayed back. So it's funny how history works. But so we're going to open up with Bob and Deb. Bob is going to share some haikus that work. And then Deb is going to join. And Bob will click you through a series of haikus he's done with this artwork. And Deb will join us here in a moment. And then after that, Gordon Ball.
There you got it. Okay.
And I'll introduce Gordon next, and then Bill Morgan after that, and Bob Rosenthal. But at that point, we'll give you a little more background on each. So, without further ado,
is it working?
It's
okay.
I can hear you from here.
Well, I think that deserves a well-deserved round of applause. Peter Hale. Only Peter could tell the whole history of how Alan got to India because Gregory was in love with this mysterious woman. You always need, that's the beat history and the gossip is what? Not the same thing, Gordon. Did Gordon say yep? Whatever yep means, okay. Well, I don't know how many people were here or there being St. Mark's Church last night, but wow, what an incredible birthday, evocation and transcendent sighting of Alan within us. This place is called Howl, and it was, named for that. For that poem and for Alan. And you'll see "ha-ha" on the door. Jane Friedman has the wickedest sense of humor. So it's not enough to call the place Howl, but you have to have the Howl Art Space and Howl Archives being housed here so that it gets to be, thank you, yeah. And just a little shout out to Aldo back there and to Doug, who have held this place together. And they're still howling. Okay, well, Deb Baker's book, Blue Hand, really is, an in-depth look at those 18 months that Alan spent. I made a movie called Ginsberg's Karma that you can find on the internet. It was made in 2008. When I was invited to the Calcutta Book Fair. Actually, it was the year that the book fair had as its featured country the United States. I don't know if you know about Bengali politics, but it is real left, and there were, of course, demonstrations about the U.S. coming there, even though it was U.S. poets. Now, when we went to Nicaragua in 1988, they named the tour U.S. Poets Invade Nicaragua. So we were able to get around that dilemma, but in India, they supposedly canceled the book fair because of the pollution. Now, the pollution in India doesn't just appear from the book fairs, but this was, the book fair in Calcutta has the largest attendance of any book fair in the world because people there love their books, which is why the hungry poets were already apprised of Allen when he showed up. What is this famous guy doing sitting with us in the Poet's Coffee Shop? Yes, there's actually a place called the Coffee Shop. That's where the poets hung out. That's where Allen came and learned about poetry, the forms of poetry that were being used there. It's where he started using his own name in his poems on occasion, and which was a form that was used by the hungry poets. He was living in a hotel that most of the poets would not venture to. He and Peter had come across on the tramp steamer and were living off of Peter's veterans benefits. Howl was out, he was famous, but the money wasn't there. So they were, and in a way, that's what the film talks about, is how the way that Allen traveled on the cheap, hitchhiking around, getting where he had to go without any commerce. He wasn't a tourist. He was living the life there, and that is the lifestyle. I think that's where the hippie ethos springs from. Basically, Allen going to India to search for a way for spiritual enlightenment that might not use any of those drugs. And so the people he ran into there, there's stories about how he actually ran into Trungpa on that trip, So anyway, those stories will all be told. You'll get to hear them all. And I'm going to read these. These are not AI. Just to let you know, Aldo knows the name of the artist here. He's a well-known illustrator in Hansho is the name of the artist, and he made these for Ram Devanini, who produced the film, and he's done other work for Ram. And I'm going to read the accompanying haikus, if I can find them. Okay. You ready? Behold, Blake, baby. Sunflower rising is sun. Inspiration touch. Reptile dreams come true. Harlem conjures India. I'm on my way, Blake. So this is all references, of course, to the vision that I love the way Allen would always put it. After masturbating, Blake came to him and gave him the vision of poetry and India and spiritual enlightenment, and all the colors came together. And then he also had the reptile dreams. While he was in India, whoops. This is the hungry poets. Okay, I got my. Say again.
The Kritivash poets. The hungry list came out after he left.
I stand corrected. Deborah, do you want to come up here? Deborah really knows the footnotes here.
Are the illustrations response to the poems?
The poems are responses to that. That's Sunil. Sunil was not a hungry poet? Hey, Deborah, was Sunil a hungry poet?
No.
Oh, God. Well, this book is completely wrong. So read Deborah's book. But this book has got a lot going on, even if it's wrong.
It's actually in Iowa, writers program, when the Hungry List organized themselves and started getting around about
That's not what he told me. Poets Coffee House welcomes Alan and Peter. Poets eat, drink words. Let's go, guys. And this is where the poets would not venture forth. What was the name of that hotel, Bill? Do you remember? The Andabia. Thank you, Deborah. Okay. Peter, sit with me. Sure, Alan. Only which you? Both of me, my love. T-Head Network, right? Sitting with sadhus, take flight. Ganges flows all night. Yeah, here we go. Poetry ticket. Diane, Gary, Al, Peter. You got to watch your syllable count. I would never call him Al except for the syllable count. Liberation Train. And here's Deborah's blue hand. Sky, Krishna's blue hand, screws Alan's head back on right. Burning Ghat, flames on. Okay. Ginsberg's Karma births America's first hippie, joins God's pantheon. I'm going to read one paragraph before we get Deborah up here, and that is when I was, where was I? I was in Delhi, and I was with a bunch of filmmakers, and one of them asked me if I knew about Trilokan. And I said I didn't. I don't know if anybody here know about Trilokan? But Trilokan was evidently a poet in Delhi who ran into Alan, and then this paragraph happened. Okay, if I can find it here. Or Taj Mahal. There we go. Circling Delhi. There we go. Okay, by the time we get it all sorted out, there's only enough light to film Jitendra alone. I pull out my camera and stand next to Ram while he shoots with a professional camera. By gumbo, it's beautifully lit. And once Jitendra starts to rock, he rolls it out like Ginsberg himself. A Satori moment. Read the aforementioned Trilokan, which means third eye in Hindi. Jitendra recites in Hindi a Trilokan poem about Ginsberg. Footnotes, spoken in English. It starts to sink in. Is this local poet one of the hundreds Alan would meet in India, the missing link, marking the beginning of his transformation from taking drugs to following a spiritual path? The poem follows Trilokan and Ginsberg high on meditation and breathing techniques as they race madly through Benares until the perspiration from their exertions begins to physically refract the sunlight. They look at each other's face and see rainbows of psychedelia, the entire world heightened, not by LSD, but by physical joy and human sweat. Thank you very much.
All right. Deb Baker, come on up. I thought we would have a conversation between the two if you want to sit on the stool.
Oh, I will sit on the
Sit on the
stool.
stool.
Well, Deborah's going to do a little work herself, I believe, first. Is that right?
And then you can have the conversation. Yeah, read the introduction from your book. And
No clickers.
Okay, I just thought I would start by saying that I met Allen Ginsberg once when I was in my 20s, and I went to this Upper West Side cocktail party, and I knew there were going to be like famous writers there. And I brought this Bengali writer who had become a friend along with me. And I remember Ginsberg sitting in the corner of this sectional sofa, and there was like, you know, these very famous writers around, but he only had eyes for the guy that I brought. And so he got him over, sitting on the couch next to him, and was interrogating him about all the writers that he knew in Calcutta. And I was really charmed by that, because I know Ginsberg liked famous people, and there were plenty of other people for him to talk about. So when I was trying to think about, I wanted to write a book about the imaginative relationship between India and America. That we've had a lot about England and India, but sort of hadn't been so much about India and America. And I remembered that when I first moved to Calcutta, this was in 1990, to marry this Bengali guy, like there was so much suspicion of me, as there was so much suspicion of Alan and Peter. You know, there was a whole portion of the Calcutta literary world that assumed they were both CIA spies. I understood that superstition because I was also subject to that superstition. And, you know, after I had been there for some time, like some months, they realized that I wasn't going away, and so they started telling me stories about Allen Ginsberg. So, you know, flash forward 10 years, I was trying to figure out how I would write about, and I thought, oh, the India journals and Allen Ginsberg. So that's sort of that was the genesis of this book. And I was always grateful to Allen because there was a really sincere affection for him, and I felt like I was under that, you know, protective cloak, and the superstition sort of dissolved after that once they started talking about Allen. So I'm going to read from the beginning of the book, 5 minutes max. And yeah. It was well after midnight on December 11th, 1962, and Allen Ginsberg, a 37-year-old poet from Newark, New Jersey, had gone off to pee for the umpteenth time. Ginsberg, along with his sometime lover Peter Orlovsky, was hurtling north in a third-class carriage on the Dune Express. The train had started at Howrah Station in Calcutta and would deposit the pair sometime the following day in Benares. Ginsberg had been suffering from kidney ailments for years. In the tiny lavatory mirror, behind the heavy black frames of his spectacles, his eyes held a gaze of curiosity, magnified by the power of his lenses. There was his nimbus of thinning hair. There was the heavy woolen sweater over a lumberjack shirt. There was the familiar and worn expression of loneliness. Back in their compartment, Orlovsky was already fast asleep on his bunk, his dirty blonde hair splayed across an innocent face, oblivious to the chill wind that came through the open windows. He was undoubtedly dreaming of the talkative Bengali girl who had come to see them off at the station. They would soon be reunited. Though he had been Ginsberg's companion for 8 years, his feelings for him were now more filial than sexual. Orlovsky was 29. They had spent the last 7 months in Calcutta. In the final days of their stay, Ginsberg had sat on the muddy temple steps below the Howrah Bridge, taking leave of the small shrine dedicated to the Mother Goddess. Above him, the traffic had roared its mantra hum as it rattled across the Hooghly River. As a young man, Ginsberg had formalized an intricate ceremony of leave-taking. So from the bridge, he had walked north to the burning pyres of Nimpatala, where corpses, serene on their flower-bedecked litters, patiently awaited his goodbyes. His last evening was spent in a rowdy farewell to the Bengali poets he had come to know. Stumbling out of the toilet and swaying down the corridor as the train clattered away into the night, he returned to his seat to write down his thoughts in his notebook. For 20 years, Ginsberg had relished the rituals of pen and paper, the relief that accompanied the emptying of his thoughts and the satisfaction of notebooks with filled pages. There were the small spiral-bound pocket notebooks that he wrote in on subways and buses, and there were the sturdy bedside notebooks for nighttime cri de coeur or an early morning dream. Returning to a notebook after a day's neglect, he would begin in the present and circle back, writing his thoughts and observations not as he had them, but as he recalled having them. Periodically, he cast back through the pages, prospecting for the glowing seam of a poem, like a miner long accustomed to working in the dark. As the years passed, the notebooks changed. More and more, Allen Ginsberg used them like a blank tape, inviting the world outside and inside his head to inscribe its noisy jive of unlikely juxtapositions. In India, he had several notebooks going, and one, designed for schoolwork, now sat open on his lap, interleaved with unanswered letters. On its pages, the tracks of his thinking crossed the borders of day and night, past and present, waking and dreaming, poetry and prose. The rhythm of the train itself was inscribed in his handwriting and jagged line breaks. He made a brief stab at a poem, but his thoughts scattered, his mind returning to the other figure on the platform at Howl Station, a young woman from South Carolina with the improbable name of Hope Savage. He had kissed her goodbye. Until meeting in India, they had seemed to circle each other in a pas de deux of travel. 10 years younger, she had arrived in Greenwich Village a year after he left New York City for Cuba, Mexico, and San Francisco. They had come closest to crossing paths in Paris, but by the time he'd arrived, she'd embarked on a journey that would take her from the Arctic reaches of the Soviet Union to southernmost tip of Sicily. He had first heard of her in 1956 from his friend and fellow poet, Gregory Corso. While working as a merchant seaman on a ship bound for Alaska, he had received a letter from Gregory announcing, "She, Allen, is our Rimbaud and more today." Ginsberg sat cross-legged on his bunk, coughing and chain-smoking as he wrote, his knapsack taking up the floor in front of him. Peter's new Sorod was tucked under the train seat, as was his own striped umbrella and typewriter. As the lights outside became few and far between, the wheel carriages finally picked up speed, and the rhythmic doom-doom drummed a roll of finality into his brain. The Dune Express tracked the path of the Ganges backward, shadowing its pulse as it traveled from Dehradun in the Himalayas across the Gangetic Plain to the Bay of Bengal. Soon there was just darkness, broken only by the light of the illuminated windows skipping across the shallow banks of the train bed. The thought of the young woman left behind under the station clock dissolved into a more global anxiety. Should he marry Hope Savage? He had been down this road before. It was the old shaggy dog story, and in his experience, the punchline was more painful than funny. Somewhere on the train, a baby cried, as if to remind him just how unlikely a prospect this was. In the end, in his rush to find their reserved third-class carriage, racing after the coolie as their luggage slunk away into the platform crowds, he'd added nothing more to his kiss than a wave goodbye. And as quietly as Hope Savage entered Allen Ginsberg's account of his Indian travels, she now departed. While his lone-lit cabin sped along the rails, he put away his journal and picked up his book, Journey to the End of the Night. From this distance, it appears that Allen Ginsberg was enthralled to a tired idea. Disillusioned Westerner goes to the mystic East in search of what exactly? A guru? An unlimited supply of drugs? Young boys? Nirvana? A wife? Or like every pilgrim, did he simply cherish the belief that beyond the known world there exists a place where ailments are healed, the heart is filled, and demons are vanquished? Whatever he hoped to find in India, Ginsberg retained the faith that on arriving at his next port of call, tiny checks from his publishers would be waiting for him in batches of forwarded mail. He had faith that no matter how unwashed, a poet would be welcomed. The discomforts, delays, and illnesses that plagued him from time to time did not deter him. And perhaps just as the mysteries of train tables, currency exchange, and cheap accommodations were eventually resolved, so might others. Yet despite his passion for the idea of India, there was something improbable about Allen Ginsberg's pilgrimage there. Unlike many of those who came after him, he neglected to leave much of his past behind. Instead, he brought most of it with him.
Bring that up. Grab that.
Okay. Here we go. That's just perfect, Peter.
Just for a brief discussion here, maybe we can have a couple questions from you, but I'll get you started. My question would be, since we're bringing the Kritibas poets up and the Hungryalist, I never really knew what the Hungryalists were. I think of them as sort of almost self-publicizing countercultural movement of India after Allen left, whereas the Kritibas poets were Sunil Ganguly and Chatterjee. And so, being that it seems like Allen spent a lot of time with the poetry community in Calcutta, whereas in other trips or other parts of India, he was doing other things, more seeking out gurus. But this is kind of a real poet scene there. So the question, how Allen really gets connected to these people, would be my question.
Well, I have to defer to you on this historical question.
Yeah, you know, my husband, who's a novelist, gets really annoyed whenever I correct him on points of fact, you know, because his stories, of course, are much better than mine. But yeah, so Allen went to College Street Coffee House, which had tables for poets. It also had tables for playwrights and filmmakers, and it was and children's book writers. So Allen had been traveling separately from Peter, and while he was away, Peter had met with sort of the American consul, and the American consul sort of introduced him to all these very kind of staid, what the Kritibas poets called the vegetarian poets, you know, a very high caste group, very much under the influence of Tagore. And whereas the poets that Allen met at the coffee house were, you know, more like versions of, you know, him and Kerouac and, you know, younger versions of who they had been. And they were astonished that he wanted anything to do with them because they could hardly understand his accent, and they couldn't make head or tails of Howl, though he explained it to them. But, you know, they eventually, you know, kind of, you know, forged this unlikely friendship. Allen and Peter were staying in this dreadful hotel. They couldn't believe that a white person would stay in that kind of hotel. And Allen, you know, was focused on meeting sadhus and hanging out at the Nimtala, the burning ghat. So he eventually corralled them. They were, of course, devout and, you know, secularists and atheists, and they had wanted to have nothing to do with sadhus and their religion in general. They were all devout Marxists. So, you know, he was, you know, trying to turn them on to he was interested in India, which were these, you know, ganja smoking sadhus. Yeah, so and the Hungryalists sort of, Sunil told me that, like, he didn't believe the Hungryalists he felt they were pamphleteers, they weren't real poets. But they did manage to, you know, bring in Shakti Chatterjee, or Chattopadhyay, which is how he called himself. But, you know, basically they burned, you know, everything they came in touch with. But Allen didn't believe they were real poets.
What about the Baal poets, the folkloric poets?
The Baals?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they were singers, troubadour types, and yeah, they were very influenced. He was very influenced by that idea of singing poets, and they were also kind of straddled both Hindu and Muslim beliefs. They were kind of their own creatures. Yeah.
Now he picked up the harmonium while he was there, and the harmonium was used a lot with the poetry of Tagore, how it crossed over with songs that everybody could sing along. Is that
right? Yeah. They're not great songs. I mean, there's a real kind of people really, but you know, they're basically very repetitive and kind of straddling a kind of devotional singing, though, you know, Tagore was not by any means, you know, a devout Hindu, but he liked the idea of the bells because they brought together two very different traditions, Islam and Hinduism.
And they were very, very performative.
Yes.
You know,
and colorful.
Caught Alan's eye.
Yes.
And ear. Any questions out there? There's one up here. Speak up, oh questionnaire.
What makes a great poem? You said that the poetry that they would sing together wasn't really good poetry. I want to know what it's not ridiculous, but in a way, when you think of Ginsberg, I think he must be spoken. It's much better to hear it spoken than to try to read it, for me. And so when you were talking about that, I wonder what makes it really...
Did you hear that in the back? Okay, well, here's what it was. It's a very simple question for Deborah. It's what makes a great poem? Since Deborah went so far as to say, these poems aren't so good.
That wasn't my take, because I don't...
Just excuse me, I'm just asking the questions here. So the question is, if that's not... And then it went on to, I think Alan's poetry must be heard. That's where you really get the poem. Okay, so we've got it's thrown out here for you, Deborah.
Well, you know, I don't read Bengali. I'm certainly, you know, I can speak kitchen Bengali, but I don't read it. It was Sunil Ganguly who spoke with great contempt for Malay Chakrabarti, who was the sort of leader of, they called themselves the hungry poets. They also called themselves the hangry poets, you know, putting together hunger and anger. They're also called the hungryalists. And, you know, after Sunil left to go to Iowa, of which Shakti was furious because he thought he should have been the one to go to Iowa. Another instance of America, you know, just wreaking division and wherever it goes. You know, Shakti decided in his anger to join these hungryalists, and it was a really bad idea because they were just making trouble. And Sunil said that Malay didn't even really speak good Bengali. He was not a very literary person. So it was Sunil that told me that they were just pamphleteers, not real poets. But Shakti, of course, was a real poet, probably even more of a poet than Sunil was, because Sunil later went on to write fiction, but he always thought of himself as a poet.
Right here.
Is it unfair that I have difficulty separating the poet's brilliance from his lifestyle? In other words, can we judge an individual with a somewhat questionable background against their artistic ability? Does that question have any logic to any of you?
No.
Let me say this. Alan was a genius, but in my mind, genius is just on the scale of insanity. His lifestyle was somewhat, not so much appreciated.
Oh, yeah.
And so what my question is, how do you separate?
I look around at this crowd that's here. I look around. That's what I do. That's what I do. Honestly and truly. Honestly and truly, I look around this crowd here. We're here because the great poetry here came from this great poet, and it's time to celebrate. Well, that's another thing, and we can talk about that at the bar afterwards. You know.
And this is a part of it. a physio?
I get your
All right,
point.
I'll leave it
Okay.
alone because
Yeah.
I'll give you something to meditate on when you go.
There you go. Excellent, thank you. Over here.
A question for Deborah. Do we know if Hope Savage ever came back to the States?
I don't know if she came back to the States. She died in Amsterdam. She had 2 daughters. I learned this way after I finished the book. A lot of people tried to find her, apart from me. I mean, I thought she was in Amsterdam. I went to Amsterdam. I found a woman named Elizabeth Savage, which was her name, Elizabeth Hope Savage, but it wasn't the one I was looking for. Yeah, so she did a translation. Someone sent me, like, out of the blue, I have no idea who it was, some book that she had translated some Urdu poetry. I was never able to find the book, or the publisher seemed to be some aeronautics publisher. So, yeah, she's like, in every way, was a dead end for me. But she helped. What? A total mystery, a total mystery. I would love to know, I would love her, I think one of her daughters lives in Brooklyn. I keep hoping that she'll reach out to me one day. But so far, not the case.
Thank you.
If you looked at Allen's poetry before this period and afterwards, can you discern a clear, could you describe or talk about how it clearly evolved or changed?
That's a really good question. What I found interesting was his contemporary accounts of his vision that he had in Harlem was very Judeo-Christian oriented. That's who he was reading. That's how he described it to his circle of Columbia friends and professors. But it was when he came back from India and he gave this interview with the Paris Review when he described that vision really entirely in kind of Hindu terms. And I thought that was really interesting. So that's not his poetry, but you know, one of the things that I really appreciated about reading his letters to Burroughs and to Kerouac and to Corso from India was the way he described like the Hindu pantheon. And it was like there was a god for everyone, you know. Ganesh was perfect for Peter because Ganesh loves sweets. And of course, Kali was perfect for Alan because she is the mother goddess and really unpredictable in her ways. But also he was very attached to Krishna because you know, he was in the way that the milkmaids were kind of always pining after Krishna and the way that he always pined after Lucian. So I was appreciated like having that really concrete, because before then the whole Hindu pantheon I just didn't know how to put it all together. But he was very good pedagogically when he was explaining things. So I was really grateful for that. But that doesn't answer a question about how his poetry changed.
Well, he did write the poem "The Change" when after he left India and went to Japan. So if you want to do further digging in about what was the change, you can read "The Change." I'd just like to say one thing before we move along here, right? Yeah. Because, and that is just that when Gregory Corso came up to me and said that Cookie Mueller must get on the stage at the St. Mark's New Year's reading because she's the best poet of anyone here. He said, and she's our Rimbaud.
Oh, really?
Really. So Hope Savage and Cookie Mueller. There you go.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deb. That was really wonderful. Short and sweet, but really down to the nitty-gritty. I want to bring up Gordon Ball. He's friends with Alan since 1965, I want to say. You met Alan through Jonas Mekas and Barbara Rubin and Ponegritti. Those are names that may not be familiar to many of you, but sort of came to Alan through the film world, the avant-garde film world. He had the enviable task of managing Alan's farm up in Cherry Valley, which he's written about. We have a few copies in back called the East Hill Farm Book, which is one of the most colorful sort of depictions of Alan's life that's available out there, and a wonderful read. But he's responsible for these very intimate photos of Alan and his life. You'll notice the cadets reading Howl here because Gordon was professor at Virginia Military Institute for 26 years. So getting into the minds, making cadets read poetry. But he's been a photographer throughout all of this. And his book is an unofficial, official book party for his book, Ginsberg Beat Fellows. Hamilton University Press. So Gordon has a presentation of his photography that there'll be a book signing afterwards in conversation with the author and photographer. But without further ado, Gordon, please take the stage. Professor Ball.
Is there anybody who needs a list of captions? No? Sure. Would you mind distributing them?
Oh, you want to distribute? Okay, anybody want to? This is the down button. No, sir. Phil, anybody? Here's more. Here's a few here. There you
Is
go.
there anybody who has some water they can share?
I will get to this one.
Excuse me, would you mind sitting over there?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good mic.
It's a good mic?
Yep.
Okay. I always like a good mic. Hello. Thank you all for coming. Wonderful to see you. I'd like to dedicate this to Ann Charters and Joyce Johnson. Wish me luck with this little gadget as we move things along. Be sympathetic, but also instruct me if I make a mistake.
I'm sorry about that.
What are you sorry about?
No, I got a little water.
Thank you so much, sir.
There we go. Hold on. Sorry about that. Give me one sec.
Technical issues.
Technical issues.
Always going to have technical issues.
Sorry. Let me just start over again.
Should we dance here a little bit, Gordon?
Yeah, sure. You want to? Yeah, please.
So, when did you first get started
There we go.
Oh,
at Cherry Valley?
in 1968.
In 1960, right when Alan bought the farm? Were you kind of
It took a few months, yeah.
Yeah. And from then till what, 1970?
Oh, 71, yeah, so
Yeah.
3 years.
Right, every character came through there. This was a little too far from New York City to really be a convenient location.
Yeah.
It's just north of Cooperstown,
Yeah.
2 hours west of Albany.
6 a.m. bus and to arriving 11 a.m.
Yeah, so in the sticks, and it was on the north side of the mountain, so they were facing the north, so you couldn't really grow much on it. There was a lot of
We grew a
problems.
lot, but there was 120 inches of snow too.
Okay, right. But Orlowski famously grows raspberry bushes there, and sometimes it would be rhubarb.
Yeah.
Massive amounts of
Yeah.
everything. But
Okay, well, thank you.
Take
Thank you
over.
again. Alan, as I knew him. As some of you may know, I spent 3 years with Alan on his upstate New York farm and worked with him on books, photos, and some of his public appearances at various colleges and universities. Most importantly, he was my friend for 29 years and changed my life forever. So on this auspicious occasion, honoring the 100th anniversary of his birth, let me revisit with you a few instances that may suggest the significance of his life and work for mine. Am I not to press the up button? The down button. All right. There we go. Here's a fuzzy blow-up of a frame from tiny 8mm movie footage I shot some weeks before the incident I will describe, very close to the spot where it occurred. Here, Alan is chanting or singing, accompanying himself on that harmonium, which he had bought in Benares in 1963. The incident: a sunny afternoon, third week of August, upstate New York farm, which Alan had purchased as sanctuary for fellow poets and artists, including Peter Orlovsky, Gregory Corso, and others, just before the start of the Democratic Convention in Chicago, for which Alan was to leave. The situation in Chicago was already threatening. Masses of youths facing police, acting under aggressive orders from Mayor Daley as the unspeakable enormity of our American war in Vietnam continued to grow moment by moment. At the farm, my friend, filmmaker Barbara Rubin, and lady friend Candy O'Brien and I left the house where we had all lived together since the spring and joined Alan, seated on the grass underneath large shading maple trees in dappled golden light. At a distance, Bessie mooed, hawk flew through blue sky, and I looked Alan directly in his eyes. "We're worried about you and about things here," I began. Gregory had been rowdy, as was his wont. Alan's lifelong love, Peter, was shooting speed and had violently broken our battery-operated record player. We had no electricity. Everyone feared working near him, and he was abusing Julius, his smaller, catatonic, schizophrenic brother. "Instead of going off to deal with national problems," I continued, "maybe you should think about staying here. It would be a great existential act if you chose to stay." "I'm not an existentialist," he returned immediately, dispassionately. So my effort at persuading Alan by glorifying the step we three hoped he would take had fallen flat. Though he loved being at the center of many things, he wasn't taken in by my cheap Norman Mailer come on. I wasn't thinking of writing about him then and wouldn't, except in diaries, for a long time, but when I did, I was sure to show his independence of thought. In this 1968 instance under the maples, Alan also demonstrated his vulnerability, as Barbara, who had known him several years and had looked after Julius when Peter couldn't, and who had hoped to marry Alan, picked up where I left off. Her mouth widened, as it did when she tried explaining things to people incapable of understanding. "Alan, look! The whole source of our problems here is Peter. Don't you see? Peter's schizophrenic. He should be locked up in an asylum." "The problem is, with all the amphetamine," Alan's voice was quick but still thoughtful. "Alan," Barbara shouted back in red-faced exasperation that he couldn't see what was elementary. "It's not the amphetamine. He's naturally crazy to begin with. He's schizophrenic. He needs serious medical attention." Alan had remained calm, but now let go. "Well, you're schizophrenic," he shouted back. Barbara gasped. Alan looked down, catching himself from saying more. No one said anything. Finally, each of us got up and went their way. That evening, Alan packed for Chicago. I felt his last words to Barbara were a low blow. In a few months on the farm, I hadn't come to know him as well as I would, and some might say I idolized him. So his angry accusation was at odds with my image. Perhaps he had Barbara's deluded marital intentions in mind, though they might have recently dissipated. Certainly, he may have been unnerved by the harsh reality of her words on the man he so loved, and recognized his own emotional excess. And at some level, there must have been resonance of his experiences with his mother, Naomi. He was only human, and realizing as much would, ultimately, help me appreciate even more all that he undertook, from altering the face and form of American poetry, to standing up against greed and cruelty, to vowing not to enter nirvana before all others. In my memoir, East Hill Farm, I'd try to depict a more complex Allen than I might have earlier. Back when I was in college, before that moment on East Hill, poetry was mainly something existing on a page. We might sometimes read a poem aloud, cite a few phonic devices, note rhyme and alliteration, discuss meaning, often singular, with regard to image and symbol, repetition and refrain. It's but a small exaggeration to say poetry was no weightier for me than a crossword puzzle. I don't recall voicing a work in joy, in fear, or anything else within the whole universe of sonic response that a few printed words of poetry could generate. Yet, in another moment on East Hill, after college days, I beheld Allen hands at harmonium as his baritone tremolo intoned the introduction to Songs of Experience, and was shaken in recognition that the bard was equally William Blake and Allen Ginsberg. Hear the voice of the bard who present, past, and future sees, whose ears have heard the holy word that walked among the ancient trees. Poetry and music were linked, Allen insisted, and there's no better demonstration of it than his own music for Blake's poetry. Years later, when we studied poems at the Virginia Military Institute, or when I taught poetry writing at Washington and Lee, the sounds in which a poem lives and breathes were basic. And having examined some scholarship on the notion that Homer may have composed and performed orally, in 1996 I nominated Bob Dylan for a Nobel Prize in Literature. Allen wrote a nomination as well, and for a dozen years I ran a campaign to that end. When I first read Howl, it left little impression. I certainly didn't encounter it in the classroom, since Allen wasn't taught at Davidson College and many another school in early or mid-1960s. And I'd grown up abroad, but for occasional furloughs, I knew little about life in the United States as lived, and then attended what it was at that time a parochial institution. Certainly, my year following Davidson in avant-garde New York, and many months of cross-country hitchhiking with a spell in a Mexican jail heightened my sensitivity to issues within the poem. But it finally lived for me when I heard Allen deliver Howl in its full charging railroad train declamatory power. Allen's 1956 poem, America, closes with, America, I'm putting my queer shoulder to the wheel. Now here he is, May 1968, fully engaged in an utterly grungy, utterly necessary task no one would seek, cleaning out our old well of 7 years of gunk and mud as he stands bare from waist down in frigid water, handing a potful to me to cast away. He was no lord of the domain, though he necessarily had to spend time at his desk. And though one day he left it and called out with a chuckle to us in the field, "Serfs!" he was typically ready to share burden or play rather than stay put on Parnassus. He was a joiner once in the front yard when Gregory and I and others were playing softball with a wiffle ball and plastic bat. He happened to mention, wiffle ball in hand, I used to pitch on my madhouse softball team. Of course, a measure of this is bound up with his sense of friendship, which at times could seem without limit. Here, happy on a haystack is Carl Solomon, the dedicatee of Howl, and to whom the poem's entire third part is devoted in solidarity, while Carl, unlike Allen, remained institutionally confined. Herbert Huncke, prose writer, raconteur, junkie, con man, thief, who used the word beat in its first sense to Kerouac, who coined the phrase beat generation. Allen provided long-time support, starting in 1949. Huncke was just one of many whom Allen cared for with astounding generosity. And here are Allen and Gregory near Allen's East 10th Street apartment, before East 12th, August 1973. Poetry kinsman long-standing from the 1951 moment when Gregory was graced with a deep-eyed apparition who would teach him of contemporary poesy. Until an admirer began covering Corso in 1992, Allen was a major means of support. My teaching, the literature of the Beat generation, included Gregory's marriage, of course, but also his brilliant, shaped verse, frolic-like satire of our fear of nuclear weapons, his masterpiece, Bomb. Allen defended and celebrated this alchemical poem, as he called it, most dramatically when at a reading at Oxford, one of Bertrand Russell's disarmament people threw a shoe at Corso. I admired much in the poem, from the pair of alliterative epithets, budger of history, break of time, at the start, through the vivid mayhem of the bomb's blast and the sound poem portion near the end, with which Allen told me he helped. In 1983, I taught for a year as Fulbright Specialist Lecturer in American Literature at 3 universities in Tokyo, and I traveled a good bit around the country, from Hokkaido to Kyushu, giving guest lectures. I taught or spoke on the beats in Sapporo, Tokyo, Kyoto, Hiroshima, Fukuoka, and Nagasaki. I did not speak about, or even begin to speak about, Bomb. Does poetry, in its wildest dithyrambs, its most magnificent odes, fail in an ultimate encounter with truth? Is its value purely a matter of audience? I can't think of a better basis for asking such questions, as still I struggle for an answer. Of course, it goes without saying that family was of great value to Allen, and I'm grateful to have been included in his relations with his. Here's Edith, Allen, and Louis at his parents' apartment, Patterson, August 1973. Allen and his stepmother got along well, planning the new loft he'd move into shortly before his death. Over 24 years later, Allen set aside a room for Edith. I was always struck by the patience and care I saw Allen extend to his father, even as they argued over Vietnam and the Mideast. And Louis was an incurable punster, and Allen would sit there poker-faced and forbearing as he heard for the 100th time the same puns. Some, like, I hear in Greenwich Village lads are making lasses of themselves, and life depends on the liver, were funny the first time. During these later years, Louis was sometimes a guest reader at Allen's readings. My father, a West Virginia farm boy from a family of 12 who'd made a career for himself with what is now Citibank, was never keen on Allen. Yet, here's a photo my sister took of an historic meeting in her home just a month before my father died, spring 1977. Alan listens intently to Gordon Sr., who's speaking in a now weakened voice. Earlier, they had sat side by side on the living room couch as Alan held his hand, then picked up his finger cymbals while Peter, with his banjo, sang, shouted, and yodeled his raspberry song. Then Alan gave my father his cymbals, and with his harmonium sang Blake's Spring and Nurse's Song as Gordon joined in on the refrain, and all the hills echoed. A few years earlier, Alan had written me a letter in which he expressed appreciation of the care I showed my parents as they were failing, my mother with Alzheimer's and my father later with a stroke. When, in 1979, I screened for him my recently completed film on my mother's death, he was moved to tears and wrote very generously of it. And I imagine the extraordinary candor in Kaddish with which he depicted Naomi's decline in some way gave permission for my direct and unadorned yet sympathetic treatment of my mother's. So I'd say that both by example with his own father and mine, and his appreciation of my concern for my parents and my artistic response to their circumstance, he only strengthened my own resolve to empathize and honor. Once he began receiving income from poetry, Alan took an informal vow of penury to not keep for himself and Peter more than what they needed for subsistence. He valued the needs and well-being of others, not only in the larger public, political realm, but in the smaller, intimate, everyday. When, in 1991, I visited with my daughter Daisy, then 10, and Alan returned from travels our last night, he insisted, this was only typical, that we remain in his double bed as he took a mattress on the floor. 4 years later, I was with him, just after he'd suffered a pulmonary embolism and was spending the weekend in bed in great pain before rising to speak at the NYU Kerouac conference Monday. When several more friends entered his apartment, he rose from bed to greet them. The fridge is full of food, but I'm too weak to cook for you. So, for me, on a personal level, that's Allen Ginsberg. I hate this world without Ginsberg in it, activist John Sinclair told me a while after his death. Allen had campaigned tirelessly for John's release after he was sentenced to 9½ to 10 years for possessing 2 joints. For a great many of us today, our world is vastly different without Allen's vibrant, fearless, generous spiritual presence. Often have friends and I exchanged yearnings that he be with us now amidst the seemingly endless, unparalleled, bald-faced, morally reprehensible governmental corruption we continue to witness. And so, in this celebration of his birth, I must return to the sad fact of his death and a poem I wrote. Since Allen died, I read more Buddhism and practice Tai Chi. Since Allen died, I want to tell the world what's gone since Allen died. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Any burning questions? He'll be signing books after our talks are over, and you can, yeah.
So where is your archive now? Do you have it in a particular house in one place or another? Is it on display, or you have it?
Letters of Allen Ginsberg to me, are at the Berg Collection in New York Public. My writings on the farm in upstate New York are at Hamilton College.
And have you had a full exhibition of your photographs?
A full exhibition?
Yeah, like a solo exhibition?
Well, I did a bunch over the years earlier, yeah.
Right.
And I guess my present exhibition is in the pages of the book.
Okay, oh, okay.
Back there, yeah. But this is a good dozen
I know we
sampling,
have these here, but-
curated by Peter Hale.
Well, partially,
There you go.
yeah, and thanks to our friends here at Howl Gallery as well. Yeah, certainly. But yeah, we should get you a full exhibition in a space someday. But there's a lot of pictures in the book. That I've seen quite a bit of Gordon's work over the years, and so the book is 60 images, something like that.
Oh, I think 200
Oh,
images.
200. Okay, so it's I'm bad with numbers, but so it's a real wonderful collection, and it's so
Thank you.
intimate. Great. All right.
Thank you very much.
Talk to Gordon afterwards. Get a book, get it signed, and thank you so much, Gordon.
I think I wanted to give a little more applause there.
I'll take that.
Okay.
Let me get this.
Did I do that last image?
I did.
Remember doing it?
You did.
Somebody did it for me.
You have a card. Your card, can I get your contact info? Sure. I'm a journalist.
Okay.
At the journalist. Okay, so Bill Morgan up next, doing a talk on the unknown photographs. Bill is probably this person single-handedly responsible for making Alan's collection the most searchable and accessible of most literary collections, because he, starting from the early 80s, was cataloging it's basically a catalog raisonné of everything Alan had ever written or written on or was written about, and made it basically sellable to Stanford University, who bought it in 1994. But that was published as the Allen Ginsberg bibliography. But also in that process, he became intimately familiar with all of Alan's photography. He was sort of a part-time photo archivist after Alan died. And when I started working at Alan's office, one of my jobs was cataloging photographs as well. So Bill and I have worked through the years on the photography, and after Alan died and negatives became available digitally, we started to really look into more overlooked images. And that's where Bill's going to go with this, is the unknown and the surprising things that are actually in that collection. So if there's anybody that really knows it intimately, Bill's your guy.
Well, thank you, Peter. And thanks to everyone for coming out tonight. I'm going to talk about Alan's photography that I hope a lot of you have never seen. After it's over, I hope you'll talk to me and tell me whether you agree with me that Alan was a great photographer as well as a recognized world-class poet. I believe he had a great talent for the pictures as well. And let's see. The first pictures that we have by Alan were taken in 1944 when he was 17 or 18 years old. And during his life, he went on to take almost 80,000 photographs. He took photographs up to the day before he died. His last photograph was taken in his loft the night before he had a stroke, and it was of Peter Orlovsky and Robert Frank, his two closest friends. So it seems stopping his photo album with a picture of them is appropriate. Like many of us in our youth, Alan had an old box camera, and he took pictures of himself, his family, and his friends. But what made Alan's photos more interesting was the fact that his friends later became famous. Writers like Jack Kerouac, Gregory Corso, and William Burroughs. When these people became well known later in the 50s and 60s, the pictures he took of them became iconographic. And because of that,
They were used to illustrate the books of these writers. No one stopped to look at them as photographs. They became merely illustrations for books, just as no one really looks at Mount Rushmore or the Statue of Liberty as a sculpture. They look at what it represents to them instead. Allen had an eye for composing good pictures. In the early days, he used many of his photos to tell stories. This one from his college days is Kerouac acting as a character from an Andre Gide novel. And Allen was aware he was telling a story, and he often had people pose for him for the camera, as you see in some of his earlier pictures. Later, his photography became something more, and that's what I'd like to show you tonight. So please try to look at these pictures as photographic compositions instead of images of the people you might recognize. Even though sometimes it's very hard for me to sit here and not say, oh, that's so-and-so. So forgive me, I'll probably do it. I'll begin with this photograph that I think is one of Allen's greatest photographs. It's not an unknown photo. Allen used it in his book, The Indian Journals, but I think it shows Allen at his very best, both compositionally and emotionally. This is a young beggar on the streets of India whose parents have cut off his fingers so that he would be a more sympathetic beggar. And notice, if you can see from this illustration, that he's sitting amongst grains of rice on the ground. He was poor, he was begging for food, not for money. Years ago, when I first tried to get museum curators and book publishers interested in Allen's lesser-known and unpublished photographs, they turned down the idea. This is, I'm going to break my rules now, but this is Peter Orlovsky and his brother and sister. But the curators said that since Allen hadn't printed them during his lifetime, they couldn't truly consider them as his photographs. And sometimes they said, since they're often out of focus, they weren't really worth looking at. And sometimes they said, if they didn't fit into the beat story, no one would want to see them. But I like the out-of-focus nature of some of them. To me, they look like they're more spontaneous. The experts had lots of no's for the pictures, and I really thought that they were interesting and worth seeing. This was in the 80s and early 90s. They had a lot of rules. They said that the photographer had to have selected the image himself, and they each had to be in perfect focus and exposure. They said the photographer also had to have had a hand in the printing process. And if the photographs were to be worth anything, they had to be vintage and signed by Allen. In fact, here's Robert Frost and Robert Frost. I live in Bennington, Vermont now. So if your name starts with Robert, it's Robert Frost. This is Allen's friend, Robert Frank, of course. He once told me that people weren't buying his photographs. They were buying his autograph. And that's a very wise statement when you think about it. So after Allen died, we were out of luck. I like this picture. We've often argued about it was taken with Allen's camera, but is it Allen's photograph? Is it Robert's photograph? Or is it just a mistake with the timer? In 2007, 10 years after Allen's death, someone discovered Vivian Meyer's negatives in a storage locker in Chicago. Now, this is not a photo by Allen, but I'm using it to just remind you who she was. You might recall that she's the nanny who took 100,000 pictures in her lifetime and never showed them to anyone. In fact, when she died, there were still several thousand rolls of film undeveloped. For the same reasons that they rejected Allen's unknown pictures, the art world initially rejected her photographs. But by then, the internet had become more popular, and the man who bought all those photographs for $350 began to develop them and post them on the internet. And they were recognized by people as the great photographs that they are. There's a lot of photographs that are parallels to Vivian Meyer's photographs. I put this one up to show you that modesty was not one of them. But in the way that photography critics initially approached both their works, there was a similar reaction. Museums didn't believe she was a real photographer, but the people who saw her pictures did. Like Meyer, Allen's work falls somewhere between street photography and portraiture. I don't want to continue with this comparison between the two here, except to say that I personally don't believe the art world has given Allen Ginsberg a fair chance to be seen as an important photographer. Books say that street photography captures candid, unposed public moments in everyday life, aiming to document humanity and spontaneous interactions, exactly what Allen's photos do. This is Allen's father in the bank making a deposit. And Allen doesn't just see the world, but he interprets it in his own terms, in a way similar to his poetry. He has an eye for the decisive moment and often catches a fleeting instant on film. And I put this one up, and I should say too that Peter and I went through Allen's photographs, and we each picked 50 photographs that we thought hadn't been seen and should be seen, and our 50 photographs didn't match at all. This is one, I love this photograph, but Peter thought, no, this is not quite right. He had 50 other ones. In some cases, everything is wrong about a photo compositionally, but it seems to work out for Allen anyway. Here's a photo of Allen's grandmother. This was printed during Allen's lifetime, that's why the caption's there. But I wanted to show it to you to reinforce the idea of Allen's creative eye. The Metropolitan Museum bought a copy of this print because they said everything about it is wrong. From the lighting to the lower viewpoint of the picture, they wanted it in their collection to show mistakes. And I hope I can convince you tonight by showing you some more of Allen's photos that you might never have seen before. This is Judith Malina in the Living Theater in a protest. I don't think it has to be in focus to make it an interesting and strong photograph. This is Ray Bremser having his breakfast, an ever-present beer for Ray. This is Hunter Thompson in the corner booth of a restaurant. To me, I can picture Hunter Thompson sitting there. The most revealing works are Allen's self-portraits, though. And again, like Vivian Meyer, he took thousands of pictures of himself. To me, this goes hand in hand with his own confessional poetry. Allen's pictures of himself at Ayers Rock in Australia. And he took thousands of pictures of himself in bathroom mirrors as he traveled around the country. Then there are a lot of pictures that are surprisingly unbeat. These girls camping it up for the photo. The window of a religious knick-knack store. Here's an interesting picture of Larry Rivers. And I always loved this photograph of Judith Malina. Again, they didn't like this in the museums because it was out of focus. But I think it shows the enthusiasm of clapping. William Burroughs, who Allen took thousands of photographs of, and I think every one is a masterpiece. He really is photogenic. Stanley Kunitz sitting in the back seat of a car, and Allen turned around and snapped him. I wanted to show you a picture of Harry Smith that's not commonly seen, primping in the closet where Harry lived for several years in Allen's apartment. Harry visited Allen. He went down in the street and broke his leg, came back up, and Allen could not get him out of the apartment. This is Alan Anson, a friend of his, relaxing. And this is a banquet setting at one of those dinners Allen had to go to. Doesn't matter where it is, but I think it's a wonderful photograph. They said this one in particular looked too much like other photographers' work, and so they weren't impressed with it. But when you see just how many pictures Allen took of himself in bathroom mirrors, you know he wasn't really looking at it as a derivative photograph of someone else's. It's what he noticed at that moment. Amiri Baraka at a lecture, not a posed photo, of course, but a great photograph.
And Joel Lewis.
Yes. I love this one of Antler on the Brooklyn Bridge. He caught Antler just at the right moment as that woman runs past and gazes over at him. What are these madmen doing on the bridge? I'm sure she was saying. And another bridge in China on one of Allen's trips. And another trip with Anne Waldman. Doesn't matter where, Eastern Europe, but. And June Leaf at home. See, it's not in focus, but I think it's a good composition. And this is Anne Waldman's son, Ambrose, just because you wouldn't think Allen would take pictures of kids. And this is the other picture of Warren Beatty and Madonna. The one that's published all the time shows Madonna's face. But I like the way this captures an instant, in their lives. And people taking Allen's picture all the time and Allen taking their picture in self-defense. And again, Peter's brother and sister. Not a picture that would illustrate a book except because of the photography. And an exhausted restaurant worker at a banquet. And Alan Anson again in Allen's apartment. So those are just some examples of Allen as a fine photographer and not just a person who took snapshots of his famous friends. The book says that a great photographer has courage, artistic vision, consistency, composition, technical skill, style, and above all, a passion for his work. And I think Alan had all these. And I want to thank you for allowing me to share my bitterness.
Thanks, Bill. That was fun. It's good to see those. Yeah, we would have these ongoing conversations. We were trying to curate several shows, but it was funny how we would completely see different things.
Yeah, we
what
started
thought would
planning
work.
before COVID, a big show.
Yeah.
And everybody was interested at first, and as time went by, here I am, no show.
But we have a great talk.
Yes.
But there is a show of Alan's photography, and Vivian Meyer opened yesterday at the Howard Greenberg Gallery, and that's going to be up through the summer. We'll have a closing reception there in September 9th, it's looking like, but just check our website for updates and that sort of thing. But yeah, thanks, Bill. I really appreciate that. And we have Bob Rosenthal, who's Alan's, I say lifelong secretary. Bob started working for Alan in like 75, 77, something like that. So 20 years up until Alan's death. He was my boss starting from 1992 on, and he's been working on this piece that particularly talks about the working with Alan experience, and especially at the office.
Okay.
And well, I don't want to cut into it too much. Go right ahead.
Don't
Bob.
take my punchline.
I'm not. So.
Yeah, it's been great seeing all these pictures and hearing all these stories. And am I loud enough? Let's see. Okay, good. And it occurred to me, I mean, Alan's been dead for like 30 years, and it finally occurred to me that a story he told to me that I thought was ubiquitous, that he told to many people, he only told to me. And that's the story I'm going to share with you. I call it The Disquieted Life of the Idiot. And I mean Dostoevsky's The Idiot. And this is a quote from Dostoevsky, "And you are a great fancier of the female sex, Prince. Tell me beforehand." No, I'm maybe you don't know, but because of my inborn illness, I don't know women at all. "Well, in that case," Rogozhin exclaimed, "you come out as a holy fool, Prince, and God loves your kind." And I have a poem, The Theory of Idiots. It's an easy theory to understand. Everybody is an idiot. It's a theory given to me by Allen Ginsberg to explain why I had to be annoying to get something done, making many phone calls. Once someone complains that he gets 3 reminders. I explained the theory of idiots to him. It's not a comforting theory like relativity. It says we are all equal in our inabilities. It is effective, although inherently wastes time. Ask 5 different people to make the same call when one person is equally effective. I learn who actually does tasks and those who don't, and it makes me faster at my job and more necessary. Idiot doesn't mean stupid. I think of Alan, I think of his library. When he moved on to East 12th Street, he had an enormous pleasure having a bare rabbit warren of rooms to de-box in. He had built a library, he had a library built into an old closet off the office. He designed a library of plain wooden shelving built from floor to ceiling, completely occupied by books. With a secretary, he could manage the paper and the book flow in the tight space. His first lesson for me was called The Theory of Idiots. It was a simple theory, like I said before, that explained redundancy to be effective. In the years since, I realized that this was not a theory that he ever wrote an essay on. He must have made it up for my sake, to get me to do the work in the correct manner. I asked Alan why he had me approach 3 people to do the same task, and he told me, it's the theory of idiots. It goes like this. You are an idiot. She over there is an idiot. He in the next room taking a bath is an idiot. And I am an idiot. I still had a puzzled expression on my face. You see, you ask every idiot to do the same thing, then one of them might actually do it. Aha, I saw the light. The theory of idiots worked. The cost was merely redundancy and annoyance. And as I gained experience, I formed my own assessment. Who will actually do as one requests and who needs extra prodding? I labored under and then mastered the theory of idiots. I became smart enough to avoid tongue lashings from fellow idiots. The bottom line is, get it done. In 1978, Alan sent me to meet Ken Loaf, director of Columbia's Special Collections. He armed me with a scribed note giving me total control over the collection, and my signature was taken. And Ken made annual purchases, such as the correspondence between Alan and Jack Kerouac, or Alan and William Burroughs. But the bulk of the holdings remained just a deposit. Ken had told Alan to save everything: literary letters, business mail, legal packets, answering machine message pads, drafts of poems, books, and manuscripts. Alan's hobby was creating political files by interweaving many collections of government papers and then requested under the Freedom of Information Act. The deposit was a loan of materials. Columbia had the right of first refusal concerning any sales. Alan used to have Andreas Brown at the Gotham Book Mart pick up the material and catalog it. He paid Gotham's secretary fees to make the catalog. Alan had many doubles of the publications which never reached the deposit. Andreas sold these. I started to make the catalog of the items which we mailed to him to assign value. Yearly, Columbia sent their truck to pick up 20 to 30 boxes. He kept doubles out and we gifted them to friends. I knew that I was saving Alan more money than my meager pay was. Without fail, Alan would sit and sign each book sent to the deposit. He signed drafts, notes, stickies, and folders. Bill Morgan, our bibliographer, and I noted that Alan was scrivacious. I noticed that Alan had interesting collections of books within his library. Dostoevsky was one such grouping. Alan had a well-thumbed copy of The Idiot, which I had never read, and he warmly recommended it to me. And when I borrowed it, a revelatory world opened to me. Mishkin was terribly attractive to women, but he was not able to participate in earthly pleasures. The idiot savant is a character that Alan inhabits. He is a naked naivete, as with Candide, Bartleby, Huckleberry Finn, Peter Orlovsky, and Mishkin. They all disarm through goodness. Now me? Soon I recognized this hapless character that had no dishonesty nor evil intent, yet somehow ruined each character's life through that goodness. It's a cautionary tale about the awful choices we all face, our inability to affect others through intention. Allen had this rare blessing in that he realized that to not hang on to the trappings of possessions, he was free. He was to free oneself from hurt. The more he gave up caring what people thought about him, the more he succeeded in reaching people with his words. The overall success was predicated on his ability to build a cottage industry, which he learned in India, for this expression of poet Allen Ginsberg. The young Allen was annoying and pestering in a way with Kerouac. He was a transmutative force, super energetic, super smart. When I met Allen, he had been meditating for decades, and although still pesty in a way that demanded action, he was also contemplative. When Ginsberg bought the property on East Hill in Cherry Valley in 1966, there was no electricity. He put in propane lights, propane refrigeration, propane space heaters. He employed an unpowered mechanical ram pumping system that sent water from the well up to a reservoir uphill above the house, so the house had an adequate gravity-fed water pressure. The ram pump was idiotic in that it was very messy. It wasted much more water than it pumped, yet it got the job done. The only 20th century improvement installed was a telephone line. Allen was too connected to completely disconnect from the worlds of politics and poetry and war. In 1997, after Allen died, Peter Orlovsky extorted the people still in the New York City loft to please take out any books that they wanted. They fearfully did as they were ordered to do, and then quietly gave them back to us. I had to lock Peter out of the loft. I had been taught that nothing was more important to Allen than his archives. It was our job to be sure it remained whole. 2 days after a truck picked up all the boxes for Stanford University, Larry Rivers, who lived above Allen, had a toilet overflow, which flooded the apartment. Allen almost lost everything. Instead, he made his extraordinary literary deposit at Stanford, which combined the last years of his life and the deposits from Columbia. The collection was cataloged and made searchable, and there is much that can be viewed online. Allen's estate supported the typing of journals so that these too are available online for online research. Generosity is the key to everlasting immortality, one of Allen's aphorisms. His theory of idiots led me to become less of an idiot myself. Idiot, it's a loaded word. I soon realized that from Allen's library that he was very well schooled in Russian literature. Dostoevsky's The Idiot was one of his favorite novels. Prince Mishkin was delightfully honest and open. With the best of intentions, he shattered the life of every other character. Allen's openness and naivete likewise created a disarming charm. Like Mishkin, he was hard to ignore. Candor is the key to motivating people. Allen's aphorism, "Candor ends paranoia," resonated deeply for me as the core element of his idiot naivete, which was smart and unaffected. There was no secret agenda to create fear. The truth allowed one to disrobe without shame. It welcomed each person back into the garden before temptation. This openness to the world allowed one to inculcate a new truth, a way of perceiving the righteous path. The idiot exposes the brutal truth of society that goodness is not rewarded, and those with a pure heart are among the most feared. Mishkin is not an idiot because he is stupid, but rather because he is naive. He believes in the goodness of people, and this belief dooms him to isolation. When William Buckley told Allen on firing line that really he was, quote, really quite naive, Allen responded gleefully that naivete was a wonderful way to be. And yet, a filmmaker put this segment in a documentary, and they edited out Allen's response and replaced it with a shot of Ginsberg looking puzzled and hurt. Why remove R. Allen's disarming acceptance of Buckley's put-down? Because it's a very hard road to travel. The idiot savant is always remembered, but rarely listened to. Prince Mishkin is ridiculed for his goodness, and Allen is censored for his openness in poetry. Both Allen and Mishkin offer paths to a better world than the world is able to offer all by itself.
Thank you, Bob. That was wonderful.
Questions? Okay.
I guess we have one more story, a surprise story. Jim Farrat. You want to come up in and share? And then we'll have a reception. We can ask everyone questions at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, do you want to come up? You want to take the stool or take the chair?
The electric chair.
Yeah, wherever you're comfortable. So yeah, Jim Farrat. Let me get that. Thank you, Bob.
I don't know about all of you, but the spirit of Allen is for me in this room because of the memory of who he was to individuals. The public Allen, the private Allen. I don't have these beautiful prepared remarks, and I thank each of the persons that came up and shared with all of us the Allen that they knew. I want to go back to 1968. Allen and I were the only two openly gay people that participated in the Yippie movement in the beginning. We used to meet on 14th Street in a loft across from Union Square. And when the idea of creating an idea that we would have Woodstock in Chicago, Abby's idea, and the talk about how we would organize young people to come to Chicago. After one Saturday, Allen and I went and had a cup of tea, and I said to him, I'm really upset about the way this is being organized. And Allen said, so am I. And we started talking about bringing it up. And I did. And we were not opposed to going to Chicago, but we knew what kind of police force was there. We knew that the mayor had a very clear idea of how he wanted to present Chicago to the world. And so Alan and I both tried to talk about, let's stop promoting this as Woodstock. It did not go over very well. Abby said to me privately, you know, don't fuck it up, Jim. And I said, tell the truth. 1968, the war in Vietnam, we hadn't stopped it. I'm just remembering that moment. Alan, I went to San Francisco, and I was living there in the beginning of 68. And about 5 days before the convention in Chicago, I got a call from Alan. He was in San Francisco and said, meet me in Chinatown, I want to talk to you. So I went to meet him in Chinatown, and I started the conversation. I said, Alan, I'm really concerned about what's going to happen in Chicago, and I want to be there. And he looked at me and said, I am concerned too, Jim, and I just bought a ticket to go to Chicago. And I foolishly said to him, will you buy me a ticket? Now, the generosity of Alan has been well spoken to, and the kindness of Alan, but the ego of Alan also has to be talked to. He knew where to be and when to be, and that harmonium was always in the room with him, calming the space and centering on Alan. I was disappointed because I didn't have any money, and there was no way I could get to Chicago in time for the convention. Alan did, and as we all know, Alan was a calming force in the chaos that the Chicago police riot caused to young people, from the McCarthy kids to the Yippie kids in the park. I tell that story because there was a side of Alan which was self-creation. It was very important for him to be where he wanted to be, which happened to be where it was happening. Remember him on the stage with Dylan, with the harmonium, you know, just remember. And the human side of Alan, underneath the spectacle of Alan, the brilliance of Alan, the human side, for me, always is what had written Kaddish. I have gone back and read that poem more than any other piece that Alan wrote, because it was a foreign culture to me. Not being Jewish, this was so much an expression of that Jewish spirit, not religion, but that Jewish spirit. So I wanted to share those two little stories. I have one about Robert Frank and Julius eating his turds in the car up to Cherry Valley, but I'll leave that to another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. It's good to see you. All right. We have a reception here, meet and greet, mingle. I think you can step out to the back patio here, but yeah, thanks everybody for coming. And happy birthday, happy 100, Alan, and happy to honor everybody. Bye-bye.
Oh,